In every company, in every timeline, the story begins the same. A contract misplaced, a version overwritten, a folder named Final V7 that was never final, never version 7, and never truly found again. People think chaos is accidental, but it isn't. It's a loop, a cycle repeating across decades, teams, mergers, until someone sees the pattern. Today, I'll show you why most organizations use SharePoint wrong, and why the few that escape the loop tie Dynamics, Microsoft 365, Purview, and Copilot into one system where documents finally stay where they should have always been. Nothing is random. Everything is connected. The loop appears. The loop appears. People think disorder happens suddenly, but chaos is not an event. It is a slow accumulation of everything we never controlled. A sales opportunity opens. Notes scatter across emails. Drafts live on desktops. Someone drags a copy into a Teams chat to make it faster. The first fracture forms. Now there are two truths, each slightly different, both claiming to be the latest. You can feel the loop tighten. SharePoint is invited, but only as a file share. Folders nest like tunnels under Winden. Names stretch into nonsense. Final V3, Final V5, Final V7. No one can say which one holds the promise the client accepted. No one can prove it. The deal slips. Not because the work was bad, because the evidence was displaced in time. A project begins. Energy surges. A new team appears. Then channels. Then private channels. Each one becomes a pocket universe with its own documents library. Files multiply. Ownership blurs. A colleague leaves. Their OneDrive evaporates on schedule. The only copy of the critical decision log went with them. The project still finishes, but the lessons are erased. That lesson will be relearned at great cost 5 quarters from now. The loop does not care. It repeats. A customer case erupts. Screenshots fly by email. Attachments stack in Outlook like sediment. A manager forwards one thread to another team, creating a second, diverging strand. Compliance asks for the chain of custody. Everyone looks at one another. They did the work. They cannot prove the work. The audit fails in slow motion. No alarms. Just the quiet realization that nothing connects. The documents aren't lost. They're displaced in time. This is why Dynamics without document discipline always fractures. Dynamics is the ledger of events. It remembers the opportunity, the project, the case, but without evidence anchored to each record, the ledger is a story without artifacts. Events, unproven, claims, unbacked. When the moment comes, the dispute, the regulator, the audit, time demands a proof you cannot summon. And SharePoint, used as a dumping ground, makes it worse. SharePoint is not a basement, it is an evidence vault. But when you treat it like a shared drive, it acts like a mirror. It reflects your disorder back at you at scale. Folders replicate like parallel timelines. No metadata, no life cycle, no fixed points. A file can't be found because it never had a name that meant anything. A version can't be trusted because nothing marks it as the one that governed the decision. So the loop continues. Version confusion leads to misalignment. Misalignment leads to rework. Rework leads to quiet resentment. And somewhere in that chain, someone drags a copy out to make sure we don't lose it this time, birthing yet another lone timeline that cannot be reconciled. You can plot it on a wall if you like. Red string, pins, photos of folders. It will look dramatic. It will not change the outcome. Every department becomes Winden. Sales with contracts spread across 3 sites and 6 inboxes. Projects with artifacts orphaned in private channels no one can enumerate. Service with evidence sealed inside personal mailboxes, each function building its own knot, certain they are different, certain their process is special. The pattern is the same. The loop does not care what you call it. People ask for more training. They host brown bag sessions on findability. They publish a tip sheet about naming files better. Then the next quarter arrives, and the same people repeat the same gestures inside a new team for the new thing, and the loop spins again. Training without law is theater. The cost is not just time, it is trust. When a seller hesitates to send a contract because they aren't sure it's the one legal approved, they lose seconds that matter. When a project lead can't retrieve the last signed-off scope, they yield ground they never regain. When a service manager can't prove who saw what and when, they invite doubt into the room. Doubt is expensive. Doubt compounds. Most will say they need a new tool. They will ask for another app, another plugin, a better search. But the problem was never the tools. It is unstructured time. No fixed points, no binding law, no witness to hold the narrative together. This is how the loop appears quietly, inevitably, and then all at once. Sprawl as time not. Sprawl does not explode. It grows. It threads itself through your week, then your quarter, then your year, until the shape of the work is no longer visible. You try to pull one strand and 3 more tighten around your wrist. That is the knot, not a tangle of files, but a prison of unmade choices. It begins with comfort. A team for everything. A channel for every idea. A folder for every mood. Private channels whisper promises of control, then fracture the record into places you cannot govern. Each private channel spawns a hidden SharePoint site with its own library and its own rules. No one writes those rules. They just emerge. You don't see them until you need something, and then it's too late. Email becomes the second rope. A draft leaves SharePoint as an attachment. It returns as a different copy, but with the same name. 2 truths now inhabit the same subject line. Someone saves it to their desktop just in case. OneDrive Sync pulls it to a laptop that will be re-imaged next month. Another timeline is born, guaranteed to diverge. Nothing malicious, just gravity. Things fall apart without anchors. OneDrive duplicates feel harmless. It's my working copy, someone says. But personal spaces are short-lived timelines. They serve the moment and betray the future. When the owner departs, the tenant reclaims the space. The record dissolves on schedule as designed. The argument that depended on that record collapses in court, also as designed. Systems keep their promises. People prefer myths. The classic error completes the knot. SharePoint is treated like a network drive. Subsites become tunnels with no map. Nested folders act like calendars without dates. You descend 5 levels deep and find an archive inside an archive with names that record nothing and mean less. The performance problem you feel is only the symptom. The truth is simpler. There is no identity. Without identity, time has no marks. Without marks, evidence cannot be proven. Dynamics carries the event keys, but sprawl cuts the wires. A record exists, a case, a project, an opportunity, but the artifacts that prove it drift in parallel spaces. A link should bind them. Instead, people paste copies into chat threads. They forward attachments across departments. They rename files to remember context that metadata refused to hold. Memory moves from system to human hands, and human hands forget. Version histories try to help. They speak softly from within a single library, but sprawl creates many libraries that never meet. A version history cannot see across timelines. It cannot reconcile a file saved to the wrong site or a draft birthed in a private channel no one else can list. It cannot recognize the name Final V7 as a cry for help. It calculates changes with merciless precision. It cannot restore meaning. The knot tightens in meetings. Someone shares a screen. A path flashes by in the title bar. See users or downloads. The group nods. No one asks where the source of truth lives. Later, a different path appears in a different meeting. The same document almost. Small differences, large consequences. A clause omitted. A number outdated. The project edges forward wearing 2 masks. At the checkpoint, neither mask matches the ledger. People propose ceremonies. a weekly file cleanup, a shared spreadsheet tracking who has what. The theater calms nerves. It does not alter physics. Copies propagate at the speed of email. Folders multiply at the speed of permission requests. Private channels grow at the speed of fear. Each seed becomes a tree. The forest blocks the sun. You learn to navigate by sound, not sight. Then you feel the audit before you see it. The request lands. Show the approved contract linked to the opportunity at signature. Show the evidence tied to the case at closure. Produce the version that governed the change order. The room is quiet. You can find many. You cannot prove any. This is Sprawl's final trick. It replaces proof with abundance. The documents aren't lost. They're displaced in time. The knot is not a filing problem. It is a design myth. You believed location was identity. You believed folders were memory. You believed copies were safety. The knot feeds on those beliefs. It will keep feeding until you abandon them. Only then do you see the pattern. Events need evidence. Evidence needs law. Law needs a witness. Without those, you are only traveling. You are not arriving. Dynamics without documents. Dynamics remembers what happened. It stamps dates. It tracks owners. It holds stages like beads on a wire. But without documents bound to those events, it is a ledger without artifacts. Numbers without signatures. Stages without terms. A memory with no evidence cannot survive scrutiny. An opportunity moves from qualify to propose. A field changes. Someone types a note. The system records the moment with merciless precision. But the draft that shaped the price, it lives in a chat. The red line that negotiated risk, it was emailed as an attachment, then altered, then forwarded. Dynamics knows the meeting occurred. It cannot show what was agreed. The ledger speaks, and time replies. Prove it. A project begins with a charter. Tasks form. Dependencies link like bones. Dynamics marks the plan. But the scope statement, the change log, the signed-off design, these exist elsewhere in places that do not bind to the record. A private channel guards the latest version. A desktop holds a better one. When the dispute arrives, the timeline looks complete until you ask for the proof. The shape remains. The substance is gone. A case opens. A customer sends screenshots. A colleague pastes them into an email and CCs 3 teams. Dynamics notes the escalation and assigns priority. The evidence fragments across inboxes. The resolution notes say, issue resolved. The regulator asks, show us how. You search Dynamics for attachments. You find references to files that never lived there. The story is intact. The chain of custody is not. This is the fracture. Dynamics is the system of events, not the system of evidence. It was never meant to be a vault for files. It was meant to point, to bind, to link the narrative to artifacts stored in a place designed for them. That place is SharePoint, but only when SharePoint is treated as an evidence vault, not a digital basement. Without that bond, users compensate. They paste screenshots into notes. They store files in email. They rename drafts as if names could carry truth. They ask Dynamics to be a witness. It cannot be. The witness nods. It cannot testify. You can feel the symptoms. Opportunity close dates slip while people hunt for the latest. Project baselines drift because the approved scope cannot be produced. Case resolution times stretch as teams reconstruct steps they already took. Leadership blames adoption. Adoption blames training. Training blames habits. The truth is simpler. The event record is clean. The evidence record never existed. The mistake is not failing to upload a file. The mistake is failing to design the bond. A record without a mapped document location is a timeline without coordinates. An entity without a content type strategy is a table without meaning. A process without retention is a path without an endpoint. The loop feeds on that absence. It loops because nothing stops it. The fix is not theatrical, it is structural. For each entity that matters, opportunity, project, case, you define a single SharePoint site per capability. You configure the entity to automatically create or link a dedicated document location on first need. Not a folder someone guesses at, a location stamped by the record, named by a rule, owned by the process. You anchor identity with content types. Contract for opportunities, statement of work and change order for projects, customer evidence for cases. You require metadata that ties artifact to event, business unit, life cycle state, sensitivity, retention category, external sharing allowed. You make saving without those coordinates impossible, not unkind, inevitable. You bind that location back into Dynamics as a visible pane, not a secret path. Users see the documents alongside the stages. They click a link, not a file. They open the latest because latest is no longer a guess. Version history remains inside the library, where it belongs. But the record points to the truth with a single, merciless finger. And when someone attempts to drag the work into email, a different law speaks. Data loss prevention intercepts the act. It does not shout, it asks for justification, it records the moment, it remembers the pattern. The ledger and the vault now share a language. The event names the evidence proves the event. Events without artifacts are rumors. Dynamics gives you the events. Without the artifacts, you are only telling stories. The loop's cost. The bill does not arrive as a single number. It arrives as minutes shaved from decisions, as hours bled from weeks, as quarters that refuse to close on time. It arrives as the weight in a room when no one can answer a simple question. Where is the signed one? You can feel the deficit long before you can calculate it. A seller opens Outlook to grab the latest. 10 minutes searching, 3 versions found, none with certainty. The call window narrows, confidence thins, the buyer hears the hesitation, price is no longer the argument, trust is. The loop charges a fee for every stall, every resend, every apology dressed as diligence. A project stand-up ends with action items to confirm which scope is approved. That is not work, that is repair. The team rebuilds a decision that already happened because the artifact that proved it slipped into a side channel. They will rebuild it 3 times this month. Each rebuild feels small. The accumulation is not. Compliance sends a quiet request. Provide the agreement linked to Opportunity 348, effective date June 12th. The team produces 5 PDFs. 4 are drafts. 1 is unsigned. The right one exists somewhere. It cannot be summoned on demand. The regulator does not care about effort, it cares about proof. You pay with leverage first, with money later. Executives blame search. Search returns what exists. It cannot return a bond you never tied. They blame users. Users operated within the physics you set. Folders instead of identity. Attachments instead of links. Copies instead of coordinates. The loop is not malicious, it is indifferent. It finds everyone equally. Legal grows cautious. It inserts delays to compensate for uncertainty. Clauses become thicker. Approvals stack higher. Cycle time lengthens under the weight of doubt. Sales call it bureaucracy. It is not. It is self-defense against a universe without fixed points. People become archivists of their own work. They hoard copies just in case. They drag final to their desktop because the system never promised to remember. This personal insurance feels prudent. It is expensive. It creates private timelines that must be reconciled later, often by people who did not create them. The cost moves forward, disguised as comfort. Morale does not break with a shout. It erodes. Professionals who want to build start to curate. They learn which colleague's OneDrive is the real source. They learn which channel hides the truth. Knowledge becomes social, not structural. When those people leave, they take the map with them. The system remains. The truth does not. Risk mutates. A lost draft becomes a missed clause, becomes a dispute. A misplaced evidence file becomes a failed audit, becomes a penalty. None of these were caused by incompetence. They were caused by a design that allowed timelines to diverge without consequence. Where there is no enforcement, there is no memory. Where there is no memory, there is no defense. And then there is the cost you cannot measure. reputation. Partners sense disarray even when you deliver on time. They feel the stutter in your process. They feel the second guessing. They may not name it. They will remember it. Future deals inherit that memory. People ask for more hands, more coordinators, more PMs to chase documents that systems should have surfaced. You can hire against entropy. You cannot win. Entropy is patient. It waits for weekends. It waits for turnover. It waits for the moment the one person who knew the path takes a new role. Then it collects. The loop always collects. In money, in time, in trust. And it leaves a residue in the culture, learned helplessness masked as how we work here. That line sounds like pride. It is surrender. You do not need more effort. You need law. You need a witness. You need to bind events to evidence so tightly that doubt has no room to breathe. The cost ends when the loop ends, not before. El demo, fracture, shahan, static, a flicker, the timeline splits. We're inside dynamics, an opportunity record, clean fields, stages aligned. The timeline shows calls, emails, tasks, events stacked in order. The salesperson clicks documents. The pane is empty. A link says, no document location configured. They switch to Outlook. Search, Acme contract final. Results bloom like spores. Final VP, docx, final V5, docx, Acme final signed, docx, Acme final really final .pdf. Dates overlap. Names lie. They open one. The indemnity clause is different. They open another. The price is wrong. The call starts in 2 minutes. The cursor hovers. The screen freezes on a subject line. Contract. Glitch, the same record, another timeline. Dynamics, same opportunity. Documents pane opens. It loads a SharePoint location created by rule on first document need. Sales, opportunities 2025-04-03, sales contract ACME, OPP 348. Inside, not folders, but identity. Content type column, contract, statement of work. Each row carries metadata. Business unit equals North America. Lifecycle state is full approved. Sensitivity equals confidential. Legal contract. Retention category equals contract, 7 years after expiration. Name column follows a rule. 2025-04-03, sales contract ACME, OPP 348 V2, DocX. The salesperson clicks the contract item. The info panel reveals version history V1, V2 with comments linked to approval. A label badge shows encryption and sharing disabled externally by policy. A Purview note states, auto-label applied via rule set, contract keywords detected. DLP banner says, external sharing blocked. Override requires legal justification. They hover over a quick action. Open in Word, latest. The latest is not guessed. It is declared by the lifecycle state equals approved. The word header shows a watermark, confidential, legal contract. Copilot icon glows. A prompt reads, show me the versions of this contract timeline. It lists V1 drafted, V2 approved with dates, editors, and changes summarized. Each summary links back to the SharePoint item, not to an email. Back to Dynamics. The Documents pane shows the same library view. No attachments in notes, only links. A note in the timeline references the document by URL and version. The salesperson clicks Copy Link. It copies a tokenized, permission-trimmed link. They paste it into an email. Outlook displays a sensitivity reminder. You are sharing a confidential, legal contract. External recipients are blocked by DLP. No panic. They send to the client by using the approved channel, secure portal, not by attachment. Static returns. The first timeline flashes back, download folders, desktop icons, grayed out certainty. Then the second. Metadata columns aligned like rails, labels like sigils, retention like gravity. The fracture closes. The narrator returns. The difference was not magic, it was design. A record that binds to a location created by rule. A library that treats files as evidence, not souvenirs. Content types that carry meaning. Metadata that fixes time. Labels that enforce law. A link that points to truth. In one universe, the call begins with doubt. In the other, it begins. The knot revealed. People think a knot is many strands. It is one decision repeated. You do not see it when you tie it. You only feel it when you pull. The problem was never SharePoint. The problem was unstructured time. Work moved, but it left no coordinates. Folders stood in for memory. Names stood in for law. Neither could hold the weight. The documents aren't lost. They're displaced in time. That was the symptom. The cause is simpler. Nothing fixed the moment. Folders replicate like parallel timelines because location is cheap and meaning is hard. A folder called contracts bears no burden. It promises nothing. Inside another folder promises more. Quarter, client, final. Each name records an intention, not a truth. The deeper you descend, the more you are reading fiction. Coordinates should describe an artifact. Instead, they describe feelings. No metadata means no fixed points. A contract without content type is a sheet of paper in wind. A scope without life cycle state is a sentence without a period. A case photo without sensitivity is a window without glass. People fill the gap with muscle memory. They remember where they put the last one. They hope the next person shares the habit. That is not governance, that is folklore. No retention means infinite loops. A file that never ends becomes a ghost. It haunts searches. It crowds decisions. It suggests that the past is as relevant as the present. But time has an order. Evidence has a life. Without an endpoint, you cannot prove that a version governed an act. You can only show that versions existed. Regulators do not accept ghosts. No linking to dynamics means events without cause. The ledger shows that something happened. The vault cannot show why. You have a story, you do not have an argument. When pushed, you gesture at threads and dates. The knot tightens because you are pulling on strands that were never tied to anything. A file without a life cycle is like a person without memories. It wakes each day new. It cannot testify, it cannot understand. You can make it older by copying it. You can make it louder by renaming it. You cannot make it true, so the knot must be named, not cut. Dynamics stores the events. It is the calendar that cannot be edited after the fact. It remembers who, when, and in what stage. SharePoint stores the evidence. It is the vault that binds artifacts to identity. It remembers what, under which law, with which protection. Purview enforces the laws of time. It does not ask nicely. It applies labels, blocks leakage, holds retention. It ensures that endings arrive on schedule. Copilot stitches the narrative together. It reads the events and the evidence. It recognizes patterns. It remembers across versions without favor or fatigue. The 4 roles, repeated, become a map. The knot is revealed when you admit that folders are not identity. Content types are. A contract knows it is a contract. A statement of work knows it is not a policy. Metadata becomes temporal coordinates. Business unit, life cycle state, sensitivity, retention category, external sharing allowed. These are not decorations. They are marks on time. They say this artifact belongs to this event, under this law, until this moment. Retention becomes the end of the loop. Contract, 7 years after expiration. Project artifact, 5 years after completion. Case evidence, 10 years event-based. Policy document, retained forever. These are not guesses, they are promises. When the date arrives, the system acts. Not a human, not a reminder, a law. Linking becomes the cause. Dynamics entity creates or binds a SharePoint location on first need. Names follow rules. YEMDD business, area, doc type identifier, VX. Not because rules are pretty, because rules align timelines. A link in Dynamics points to that location. Nodes refer to versions, not attachments. The record can now summon its proof. Purview speaks when people forget. Sensitivity labels carry meaning across apps. Confidential. Legal contract encrypts and blocks external sharing. Restricted. Evidence disables print and download. DLP stops attachments from leaving approved paths. Overrides require justification and leave trails. Auto-labeling detects patterns, IBAN, credit cards, contract terms, project IDs, and applies law without ceremony. Users operate. The universe enforces. Copilot becomes witness, not judge. It can summarize decisions across versions. It can classify and suggest retention with references. It can retrieve the right variant when names lie. It cannot delete. It must cite sources. It must show confidence. It must explain the label it chose. A quiet observer that remembers everything and proves it. The knot is not mystical. It is mechanical. Once you see the pattern, events, evidence, enforcement, witness, you stop pulling harder. You start tying differently. Nothing is random. Everything is connected. The four roles. Every loop breaks the same way, not with more effort, with roles that refuse to blur. Dynamics stores events. SharePoint stores evidence. Purview enforces the laws of time. Copilot stitches the narrative together. Say it until it imprints. Events, evidence, enforcement, witness. Dynamics is the clock that cannot lie. It records the when, the who, the stage, the status. It is the beat string of your business, but a clock does not keep artifacts. It points to the moment they mattered. Dynamics holds the event spine and nothing more. That restraint is its strength. It does not pretend to be a vault. SharePoint is the vault that gives shape to proof, not a basement. An evidence room with shelves labeled by identity, not by mood. A contract knows it is a contract because the content type says so. Metadata fixes coordinates that humans forget. Business unit, life cycle state, sensitivity, retention category, external sharing allowed. Version history sits behind each artifact like a ledger of change. SharePoint says what existed in which state, under which law, at which moment. It does not keep rumors, it keeps records. Purview is the law that binds time. Sensitivity labels become the symbols that carry across apps like marks on a passport. Confidential. Legal contract encrypts, blocks external sharing, and forces justification for downgrade. Restricted. Evidence disables print and download even when copied. Retention labels end loops on schedule. 7 years after contract expiration, 5 years after project completion, 10 years event-based for case evidence. DLP stands at the boundary, intercepting attachments that attempt to escape governed paths, asking for reasons, writing down the answers. Auto-labeling finds what users miss. IBAN, credit cards, contract phrases, project IDs, and applies law without spectacle. Purview does not remind, it decides. Copilot is the witness who remembers without fatigue. It reads the ledger of events and the vault of evidence as one narrative. It does not replace judgment. It recalls. Prompts are not wishes. They are examinations. Show me the versions of this contract timeline. Summarize decisions made across these documents. Classify this file and apply the correct retention rule. Reveal relationships between these files. What changed between V3 and V7, and what does it mean? It cites sources. It shows confidence. It explains the label it recommends by pointing to Purview policy. It cannot delete. It cannot invent. It speaks only what the record can prove. Together, the roles create a closed circuit. Dynamics opens a timeline with an event. Dynamics binds a document location created by rule, not by habit. SharePoint receives the artifacts under the right identity. Purview stamps them with law, guards their movement, and schedules their end. Copilot walks the corridor, recalls the steps, and presents the story when asked. No one role pretends to be another. That is why the circuit holds. Most failures are role failures. Asking Dynamics to store evidence. Asking SharePoint to remember by folder alone. Asking users to enforce law with good intentions. Asking Search to testify without chain of custody. The loop thrives on role confusion. It dies when roles are absolute. You will be tempted to bend them, to let a team become a record system, to let a channel become a case, to trust a file name over a label. Resist. The universe you build follows the laws you permit. Folders are myths. Content types are identity. Links beat copies. Only truth crosses over. When you operate with merciless clarity, events in Dynamics, evidence in SharePoint, enforcement in Purview, witness in Copilot, you feel the air change. Decisions speed up because doubt has no seat. Audits shorten because proof arrives with the question. Projects stop reenacting the past because the past is visible, complete, and finite. Nothing is random. Everything is connected. The connection is role. Memory versus storage. People confuse memory with storage. They think more space will save them. It doesn't. Storage is a cellar. Memory is a map. One keeps everything. The other knows where and why. Storage hoards drafts, copies, screenshots, and scans. It celebrates fullness. It measures in gigabytes and terabytes. It promises that nothing will be deleted, and in doing so, it deletes meaning. Storage says, it's here somewhere. Memory says, it's here, for this reason, bound to this event, under this law. SharePoint becomes storage when it's treated as a basement. It becomes memory when identity is enforced. Content types turn a heap into a catalog. Contract, statement of work, customer evidence, policy document. These aren't labels for users. They are declarations to the system. A contract is not a PDF. It is a promise governed by legal terms, fixed to an opportunity, subject to retention, sealed by a sensitivity rule. That is memory. Metadata is how memory speaks. Business unit isn't trivia. It's jurisdiction. Lifecycle state isn't a status. It's the switch that separates draft from decision. Sensitivity isn't a warning sticker. It's the set of rights that follow the file into every app. Retention category isn't a date on a calendar. It's the moment time closes. Without these fields, you can only store. With them, you remember. Dynamics remembers events. SharePoint, when configured for memory, remembers artifacts in relation to those events. That relation is the difference between find a file and produce proof. A version list in a random library is storage. A version list on a contract content type inside the library stamped to an opportunities document location with lifecycle state ill-approved is memory. It can testify. People ask for Search to do the remembering. Search is a lantern, not a ledger. It will show you what exists. It will not create a chain of custody. It cannot infer that final V7 is the one that governed an act. Only memory can do that, because memory has fixed points. Retention labels bind endings. Sensitivity labels bind rights. Content types bind identity. Links bind artifacts to events. Together, they draw a line from cause to evidence that a stranger can follow. Storage multiplies timelines. Memory collapses them. When a user attaches a file to an email, storage grows. When a user shares a link to the governed item, memory strengthens. One creates parallel universes, the other keeps a single narrative. Links beat copies is not a slogan. It is a law that keeps time straight. There is a human benefit. Memory reduces the burden of belief. A project lead doesn't need to know who last edited the scope. The system shows the latest because lifecycle state says so, and retention preserves what mattered when it mattered. A seller doesn't need to guess the right contract. The link from the opportunity points to a single location, with a single identity, with a label that prevents leakage. No heroics, no folklore, just memory doing what storage cannot. And memory protects against itself. Copilot, the witness, does not trawl a seller. It walks a mapped archive. Prompts produce answers with sources, versions, and confidence. Summarized decisions made across these documents is safe because the documents are bound to events and governed by law. Without memory, such a prompt is a rumor generator. With memory, it is evidence rendered as narrative. You do not need less storage, you need more memory. You get it by converting piles into identity, paths into links, names into marks on time. You stop asking people to remember what the system forgets. You stop building basements. You start building an archive. Not a museum of everything, a memory of what mattered, when it mattered, under rules that endure. Storage is necessary. Memory is non-negotiable. Ish demo fracture 2. Static scrapes the frame. 2 screens blink into view. Timeline 1. SharePoint opens to a library called Contracts. Columns show name and modified. Folders stack like sediment. 2023, 2024, archive, final. The user types Acme in search. Results spill. Acme contract final docs, Acme contract final v.docs, Acme contract final v3.docx, Acme contract final sign.pdf, copy of Acme final docx. No content type, no sensitivity, no lifecycle. The user opens the PDF. It's unsigned. They open v3. The price differs from CRM. They sort by modified. A file bubbles up. Acme final, really final. Docs. Different clause. The meeting starts. The mouse circles. The screen freezes on a Windows path. Downloads Acme of Final v2. docx. Glitch tears the audio. Timeline 2. A governed library loads. Sales opportunities. 2025. 04. 03 sales contract. ICME. OPP348. Columns appear like coordinates. Content type, name, lifecycle state, sensitivity, retention category, business unit. The view is filtered. Content type equals contract and lifecycle state equals approved. 2 rows remain. Names follow rule. 2025-04, 03 sales contract ACME, OPP348 V1. DocsX, V2.docx. The info panel shows sensitivity equals confidential. Legal contract, retention equals contract, 7 years after expiration. A Purview banner notes, auto-label applied by contract keywords, DLP external sharing blocked. The user clicks the Approved Contracts View button. No signatures to hunt. The lifecycle declares truth. They open V2 in Word. The watermark appears. Confidential legal contract. Version history is crisp. Copilot opens. Prompt. What changed between V1 and V2? What does it mean? Copilot replies with tracked differences, cites the file versions, points to the approval comment, and notes legal's rationale. Confidence displays high. Sources list the 2 SharePoint items with immutable IDs. The user copies a governed link from Dynamics' Documents pane. Outlook warns, external sharing blocked for this sensitivity. The user sends via the approved portal. No attachments leave the orbit. Static returns. Timeline 1 flickers. Search results like echoes. File names like lies. Timeline 2 holds. Filters like rails. Labels like sigils. Lifecycle like law. The fracture heals. The narrator returns. Memory wins because it refuses to guess. Content types anchor identity. Metadata narrows reality. Retention fixes endings. Sensitivity travels with the file. Filters reveal the single path. Links carry truth. Only truth crosses over. The portal, Dynamics, SharePoint link. People think the portal is a place. It is not. It is a binding, a narrow passage that refuses improvisation. Dynamics opens it. SharePoint receives what passes through. Purview seals it. Copilot remembers it. Step wrong, and you fall back into the forest. Step right, and the path holds. It begins the first time a record needs evidence, not later. Not when someone uploads something. On first document intent, create, attach, draft, Dynamics invokes a rule, not a guess. The rule creates or binds a document location in a single, pre-designated SharePoint site for that capability. Sales maps to sales, projects maps to projects, service maps to service. No subsites, no tunnels, one site per capability. A library per lifecycle waits like rooms in order. Working, published records. The name is not decoration. It is a coordinate you can read in a courtroom. YMDD Business Area Doc Type Identifier VX. The identifier is not Acme Latest. It is the records key, OPP348, Project Indigo, Case 2219. When the location is stamped, Dynamics writes the URL into the record soul. Not as a note. As a property, the form can surface, the timeline can reference, the user cannot misplace. Links beat copies because links carry law. When the pane opens in Dynamics, it does not display a pile, it displays identity. The default view is not all documents. It is a narrow lens aligned to the event. For an opportunity, the view filters to content type, equals contract, or statement of work, sorted by lifecycle state descending. For a project, the view favors scope, change order, decision log. For a case, the view elevates customer evidence and chain of custody. Each row shows the coordinates that matter: lifecycle state, sensitivity, retention category. You are not picking files. You are selecting governed artifacts. Users save into the working library first. Drafts live where drafts belong. The lifecycle is a field, not a hope. When approval occurs, a flow promotes the file to published, carries version history, stamps lifecycle state, equals approved, and locks the protection the label demands. If the artifact becomes a record, a disposition rule moves or declares it in records. No manual dragging, no archive folders. Time moves in one direction because retention marks the endpoint. Permissions are not negotiated in meetings. They are set by policy. The location inherits site-level groups aligned to roles: sales editors, legal approvers, service readers. External sharing is disabled by default for sensitive content types. Purview enforces it without asking. If a rare override is justified, the DLP rule captures the moment, the reason, the approver. The exception becomes part of the evidence, not a shadow in chat. Email attachments do not enter. The portal blocks them at the edge. In Outlook, when someone tries to attach a governed artifact, a banner appears. This item is sensitive. Send a link. The user clicks Share Link. The system trims permissions to the audience. No file leaves its orbit. If someone pastes a local copy, DLP intervenes. It does not shame. It asks for justification or denies. Either outcome prevents a parallel timeline. Private channels do not fracture the record. The portal rejects them for evidence paths. Collaboration can happen in teams, but the document of record remains in the governed library the link points to. If a team tries to birth a just for us version, the lifecycle blocks promotion without the required metadata and approver. Myths die where law is visible. Copilot stands inside the pane, not outside it. It does not wander the tenant. It walks the bound location. Prompts reference the record. Summarize decisions on Project Indigo scope since approval. Show changes between contract V1 and V2 for OPP348 with rationale. Classify this incoming file in the working library and propose retention. Copilot cites the items, lists version IDs, shows confidence, and explains recommended labels by pointing to Purview rules. It is allowed to suggest, not to destroy. It remembers and it proves. Auditors do not get tours. They get links. Opportunity. Documents pane. Published. Contract. Lifecycle. State equals approved. Retention equal contract. 7 years after expiration. Sensitivity equals confidential. Legal contract. Version history shows who, when, what changed, why. Dynamics timeline references the exact version used at signature. The SharePoint link is the same the team used. No special binder. No curated share. The operational truth is the audit truth. Migration respects the portal or recreates the knot. Legacy piles do not stream into archive libraries. They are mapped onto content types, enriched with metadata, and placed in lifecycle rooms that mirror reality. Items that cannot be proven are quarantined for review. The portal does not accept ghosts. It accepts artifacts. This is the portal, a designed, enforced relationship between an event and the evidence that proves it. Dynamics points, SharePoint binds, Purview governs, Copilot witnesses. People think it slows them, it speeds them, because doubt is slow. Law is fast. Nothing is random. Everything is connected. The connection is the link that never lies. Content types as identity anchors. People think a file name is identity. It isn't. It is a whisper. Content type is the name carved in stone. It tells the system what a thing is, not what someone wished it to be. Without that declaration, evidence drifts. With it, time holds. A contract content type is not a template. It is an oath. It carries fields that fix reality. Counterparty, effective date, expiration, opportunity ID, lifecycle state, sensitivity, retention category, governing jurisdiction, external sharing allowed. When a file wears that type, SharePoint stops being a folder and becomes an evidence room. Views filter by what matters. Purview reads the fields and applies law. Dynamics recognizes the bond. Copilot cites the truth by name, not by guess. Projects need different anchors. Statement of work is not a generic document. It is the promise of scope and price. Its content type requires project ID, baseline date, change control flag, lifecycle state, sensitivity, retention category. Change order is a sibling with different teeth. Prior SOW reference, delta cost, delta schedule, approval stamp. Decision log is a register, not a note. It records decision ID, context, options considered, final rationale, approver, effective date. You do not save these. You declare them, and the system reacts. Cases demand artifacts that can testify. Customer evidence is not IMG 2093 PNG. It is evidence type, source system, capture timestamp, case ID, chain of custody step, sensitivity, ilk restricted. Evidence retention, ilk case evidence. 10 years event-based. Chain of custody is a content type 2, binding handoff from, handoff to, location, method, integrity check. Screenshots become exhibits, not pictures. Email exports become sworn statements, not attachments. Policy documents look similar to contracts until you inspect their law. Policy domain, effective date, supersedes, authority, sensitivity, retention equals retain forever. They are the canon. They do not expire. They are not archived in folders called old. They sit under a content type that forbids forgetting. Identity anchors refuse improvisation. They make certain fields required. A contract cannot be saved without an opportunity ID. A SOW cannot move to approved without an approver in a specific role. A piece of customer evidence cannot be uploaded without a case ID and capture timestamp. Users feel the friction. It is not cruelty, it is memory, insisting on coordinates. An identity unlocks automation. When content type equals contract and lifecycle, state changes to approved, a flow promotes the item from working to published, stamps a sensitivity label, writes a signature hash, and triggers a retention start event. When content type equals change order and delta cost exceeds a threshold, a DLP rule elevates review and blocks external sharing without legal justification. When content type equals customer evidence, print and download are disabled by label. Only link-based viewing is permitted and every view is logged. Identity also ends myths about structure. You do not need a folder per client when every item carries counterparty. You do not need a signed folder when lifecycle state equals approved filters truth. You do not need archive when retention category carries the end. The library surface becomes a map, not a pile. Views translate identity into site. Approved contracts by expiration, open change orders by delta, evidence by case and chain of custody step. Dynamics speaks the same identity. The entity form exposes the document pane bound to a location and prescoped to relevant content types. The timeline references artifacts by URL and version, not by file name. A stage gate can be made to require the presence of an approved content type item. Move forward without it, and the system blocks the transition, not a policy doc. A gate. Copilot's clarity depends on this spine. Summarize all decisions made across these documents. Narrows to decision log items with lifecycle state, installs, effective. Show me the versions of this contract timeline. Narrows to contract items bound to the opportunity, and classify this file and apply the correct retention rule becomes explainable. Copilot points to fields, to rules in Purview, to patterns detected. Confidence is not a feeling, it is a reference list. A content type is not overhead. It is identity, law, and automation in one shape. It turns storage into memory. It anchors time. Only truth crosses over. Metadata as temporal coordinates. Time does not hold itself. You have to mark it. Metadata is how you carve the marks. Not trivia, not nice to have. Coordinates. Without them, the system cannot distinguish a draft from a decision, an image from evidence, a rumor from a record. With them, the past is not a fog. It is a map. Business unit is not a label. It is jurisdiction. It tells Purview which rules apply, which sensitivity set travels, which retention schedule binds. It tells Copilot which corpus is relevant and which noise to ignore. A contract born in North America obeys a different winter than one born in EMEA. The field carries that season. Lifecycle state is not a status, it is a switch. Draft, in review, approved, superseded. Each state changes rights, movement, and site. Draft lives in working. In review can be read by approvers only. Approved promotes to published, stamps the watermark, and starts retention. Superseded locks editing and pushes the prior truth into history without letting it disappear. A state is a gate. It holds back chaos. Sensitivity is not a sticker. It is a passport. Confidential. Legal contract carries encryption and blocks external sharing by default. Restricted. Evidence disables print and download even in save as disguises and logs every view. Internal means no guest will see it, link or not. Sensitivity travels across Word, Outlook, Teams, SharePoint, and Dynamics. Rights follow the artifact. People do not need to remember. The label remembers. Retention category is not an archive date. It is the endpoint. Contract, 7 years after expiration. Project artifact, 5 years after completion. Case evidence, 10 years event-based. Policy, retain forever. These are promises. When the trigger fires, the system enforces disposition or declares a record. No weekly spreadsheet, no ceremonies. Law, not habit. External sharing allowed is not a checkbox. It is a boundary. Yes, invites a managed path through guest access with DLP standing guard. No means links refuse to form for external recipients, and attachments are blocked at compose. Exceptions demand justification, secured in audit. This is not meanness. This is the difference between a governed corridor and a side door. Identifiers are not convenience. They are anchors, opportunity ID, project ID, case ID. Without them, you cannot bind evidence to event. With them, your views filter in one click. Contracts where opportunity ID equals OPP348 and lifecycle state equals approved. Evidence where case ID equals case 2219 and chain of custody step equals received. Coordinates turn search into retrieval. Dates are not decoration. Effective date, expiration, baseline date, decision effective. They drive joins across systems. They drive retention clocks. They draw the line between what governed a moment and what came after. Without dates, you talk in circles. With dates, you can point. Governing jurisdiction is not a field for show. It is the fork in the law. Some files must never cross borders. Some labels demand different rights in different regions. When the jurisdiction is declared, Purview routes the protection. Copilot narrows summaries to the allowed scope. Compliance becomes an outcome, not a project. Source system and capture timestamp on evidence are not pedantry. They are chain of custody. A screenshot without origin is a picture. With origin, it is an exhibit. Chain of custody step, handoff from, handoff to, location. Each line preserves integrity. When questioned, you do not defend memory, you read it. Coordinates enable views that behave like instruments, not lists. Approved contracts expiring in 90 days by business unit. Open change orders with Delta schedule, 10 days. Evidence by case with missing chain of custody step. Each view is a lens. Each lens is powered by fields. The library stops being a hallway. It becomes a dashboard. Coordinates also enable gates. Dynamics will not advance a stage unless an approved contract exists in the bound location. A project cannot baseline without a statement of work with lifecycle state, ICSOs approved and sensitivity applied. A case cannot close unless all evidence items carry chain of custody completed. The form enforces the map. Copilot respects coordinates. Summarize all decisions since baseline reads decision log items with decision effective dates greater than baseline date. Show changes between V3 and V7 and meaning, uses lifecycle and approver comments to explain significance, cites versions, displays confidence. Classify this file is not magic. It points to fields, to Purview rules, to detected phrases, and explains the choice. People fear forms. They should fear amnesia. Coordinates are not extra work. They are the work that prevents rework. A file without a life cycle is like a person without memories. Metadata gives the life its dates, its rights, its end. It turns storage into memory. It turns time into something you can prove. Retention labels as fixed points. Time drifts unless you fix it. Retention labels are the nails in the floor. They stop the slide. They do not ask for discipline. They impose endings. A contract is not a file. It is a promise with an afterlife. Label it contract. 7 years after expiration. The trigger is not when you saved it. The trigger is when it ceased to govern. That is the fixed point. When the opportunity closes one and signature lands, the expiration is recorded. Purview waits, not a reminder, not a calendar invite. A clock with teeth. When 7 years pass, disposition starts. The artifact is reviewed or destroyed per policy. No folklore, no archive folder. An end that arrives on schedule. Project artifacts breathe differently. The statement of work sets a baseline. Change orders mark deviations. Label them project artifact. 5 years after completion. Completion is not a meeting. It is the final state of the project in Dynamics, carried as a signal. When the entity moves to closed, Purview hears it and starts the clock. 5 years later, the system declares the record or disposes it with evidence of decision. The past stays accessible while it matters. Then it leaves, not because you forgot, because you promised to forget. Case evidence demands a longer shadow. Label it. Case evidence. 10 years event-based. The event is not the upload, it is the resolution. When the case closes and a specific disposition event is recorded, a regulator's requirement, a legal hold lifted, the label's timer begins. 10 years later, a formal review occurs. Logs show every view, every chain of custody step, every handoff. The file does not drift into eternity. It lives long enough to testify and then rests. Policies stand outside these seasons. Label them, retain forever, not because you love clutter, because law and continuity demand a canon that does not age out. Superseded versions are preserved as records with their relationships intact. The current policy remains living. The old ones become frozen strata of meaning. Fixed points that never move. Fixed points change behavior. Lifecycle state equals approved starts retention. Superseded resets the governance, not the memory. Disposition decisions are captured with approver, rationale, and timestamp. Auditors do not want your intent. They want your record of endings. Purview produces it without theater. Labels also prevent the quiet tragedy of undead files. Drafts that never mattered do not haunt search forever. Working libraries apply shorter retention, 90 days after draft abandonment. If the file never reaches approved, it decays on schedule. This is not loss. This is hygiene. Memory preserves what governed acts. Storage sheds what never did. You can bind external triggers. Contract amendments adjust the expiration and roll the clock. Project reopens reset completion and defer the end. Legal hold pauses everything with a visible seal. The label does not fight the business. It listens to event signals and interprets time through law. People fear deletion because they do not trust their system to remember. Retention labels replace fear with certainty. The system will keep what must be kept for as long as required, and not a day more. It will remove what never mattered before it becomes a liability. It will log every action. It will ask for decisions only when law demands a human to choose. Copilot respects fixed points. It will not surface content past its retention. It will note when a summary spans a document approaching disposition. It will suggest retention categories for new artifacts, citing Purview rules, detected phrases, and event context. It cannot extend time. It can only show you where time stands. This is how loops end. Drafts do not linger. Approvals start clocks. Holds are visible. Disposition is a ritual with evidence. The future stops inheriting yesterday's clutter. The past becomes finite, knowable, and safe to carry. Retention is the moment everything returns to order. Version control as time markers. People think version history is a courtesy. It isn't. It is the clock on the wall. Each tick marks a state that governed reality. Without that clock, you cannot say what existed when it mattered. You can only guess. Guessing is not a defense. A version is not a save. It is a moment. Draft becomes in review. Red lines become acceptance. Approved becomes law. Each marker carries who changed what, when, and why. Without the why, time blurs. With it, the past stays sharp enough to cite. In the working library, versions move fast. That is expected. Drafts breathe. Copilot can narrate those breaths, but they are rehearsals. The show begins when lifecycle state turns approved. At that moment, the system promotes the artifact to published, stamps the sensitivity, starts retention, and freezes the performance. The version that carried the decision becomes the reference point. Everything after it is commentary. Markers must bind to identity. A contract version is not final too. It is V2 under content type equals contract, with a comment that says legal approved indemnity change, price aligned to OPP 348. That comment is not politeness. It is the reason the future will believe you. The file knows its opportunity ID. The marker knows its approver. The audit knows its timestamp. Together they become testimony. Markers must be scarce in the right places. In published, casual saves are forbidden. Minor corrections record as V2.1 under controlled scope. Spelling, formatting, watermark clarity. Substantive change triggers a change order, not a stealth edit. The timeline bends only when the system sees the cause. Otherwise, the record remains a fixed point. Markers turn comparisons into meaning. What changed between V1 and V2? And what does it mean? Is not a poetic question. Copilot reads red lines, approval notes, and associated timeline events. It answers with a summary cited to two immutable version IDs with confidence displayed. The summary is not new truth. It is the old truth rendered legible. Markers repel attachment folklore. If an email chain says use this version, but the published library says v2 is approved, the library wins. DLP will block attempts to send a mismatched local copy. If an override occurs, it is justified, logged, and anchored to the record. The exception inherits a marker. Even deviation becomes memory, not myth. Markers enable gates. Dynamics will not progress an opportunity to contract it unless the bound location shows a contracted lifecycle state ill approved version VX. A project cannot baseline unless the statement of work's latest approved version exists in published. A case cannot close if any evidence version lacks chain of custody completion. The gate reads markers, not emotions. Markers also end arguments. A dispute about language resolves by pointing to the version that governed the signature. No scavenger hunts. No, I think. The info panel shows V2 approved on June 12th. Approver. Legal, change summary, indemnity clause revised. Retention started that day. Sensitivity applied that day. The past does not need your memory. It has its own. You do not need fewer versions. You need versions that mean something. Let drafts breathe, but make decisions ring like bells. Freeze the bell. Name it with identity. Bind it to the event. Start the clock. Time markers do not remember for you. They stop you from forgetting. Copilot enters as witness. People think intelligence will fix disorder. It won't. It amplifies whatever it touches. In a cellar, it amplifies noise. In an archive, it amplifies truth. Copilot is not the judge. It is the witness who remembers without fatigue. It does not roam the tenant like a scavenger. It walks the mapped corridors you designed. Dynamics points to a bound location. SharePoint declares identity with content types and coordinates with metadata. Purview stamps the law. Inside that governed corridor, Copilot sees the story. Outside it sees nothing. Prompts are examinations, not wishes. Show me the versions of this contract timeline. Copilot reads the contract content type in the published library, pulls V1 and V2, cites immutable IDs, shows the approver's note, and explains the meaning. Indemnity tightened, price aligned to the opportunity ID. Confidence is displayed because evidence exists. It never replaces the record. It points to it. Summarize decisions made across these documents. It narrows to decision log items with lifecycle state equals effective after baseline date within the project ID you declared. It returns a narrative with links, dates, approvers, and rationale. No anecdotes, no rumors. A stitched thread of what actually happened. Classify this file and apply the correct retention rule. In the working library, a draft arrives. Copilot detects contract phrases, finds the opportunity ID in the body, checks jurisdiction, and proposes content type equals contract, sensitivity equals confidential, legal contract, retention equals contract, 7 years after expiration. It cites the Purview rule that matches the pattern and the business unit schedule. It cannot apply silently. It recommends, shows why, and waits for a human to accept. The witness advises. It does not decree. Reveal relationships between these files. It traces references by identifier, OPP348, in file names, fields, and Dynamics timeline notes. It suggests that the statement of work V3 cites contract V2 and that a change order arose 5 days later linked to decision ID 17. It draws arrows between artifacts, but every arrow is a link you can click. The narrative never floats. What changed between V3 and V7? What does it mean? Copilot compares red lines, weights, approver comments, and consults the life cycle at each step. It explains that V7 reversed a clause introduced in V5 after legal review, meaning risk restored to standard. It cites the two versions, the approval and the date retention started. It does not generalize. It proves. Guardrails define the witness. It cannot delete. It cannot extend retention. It cannot invent sources. It must cite items, display version IDs, name policies that drove labels, and show confidence. If a label blocks external sharing, Copilot respects it. If a document is restricted, Evidence Copilot will not surface content to prompts outside the case boundary. It knows the corridor, and it stays inside. This is why memory precedes intelligence. Without content types, prompts drift. Without metadata, context scatters. Without retention, time melts. Without labels, rights leak. Copilot becomes a rumor engine in basements. In archives, it becomes clarity, and the day will come when someone asks for what was lost. A contract believed deleted, a decision believed unwritten. Copilot will search within the lawful frame, life cycle, retention, version history. It will surface the version that governed reality, or it will say, there is no record. Both are truth. Both protect you. Copilot does not save you from work. It saves you from forgetting why the work mattered. It reads the event spine in Dynamics. It walks the evidence shelves in SharePoint. It respects Purview's law. It carries the story back to you with merciless precision. It does not comfort. It reveals a truth. Memory makes intelligence safe. Demo Fracture 3. Static folds the frame. The hallway flickers into a chamber of glass. Timeline 1. Word opens a document named Contract Final 2 DocX. Track changes shows chaos. No content type, no sensitivity. The ribbon shows sensitivity, none. In Outlook, the user types an email, drags the file and drops it. A thin banner appears, unnoticed. No classification applied. They send. The attachment leaves. Minutes later, Teams fills with replies. This is the wrong version. Clause 12 is out of date. The sender scrolls, eyes wide, searching for a save that proves intent. There isn't one. Glitch. The hallway bends. Timeline 2. Word opens 2025-04-3. Sales Contract ACME OPP348 V2. DocX from the published library. The header watermark reads Confidential Legal Contract. The info panel shows content type equals contract. Life cycle state equals approved. Retention equals the contract. 7 years after expiration. The Copilot icon glows. The user clicks it. Prompt. What changed between V1 and V2? What does it mean? Copilot responds. Indemnity adjusted to vendor standard. Price aligned to OPP348. Approved by legal on June 12th. It lists version IDs and links. The user switches to Outlook, composes to the client, clicks Attach. The governed item appears with a shield. A banner rises. This item is sensitive. Send a link. They click Share Link. DLP trims permissions. External sharing is blocked by policy for this label. A tip suggests the secure portal. The user clicks Send via portal. No attachment leaves. The link carries law. The screen cuts to Dynamics. The opportunity timeline shows Contract V2 approved, link copied to client portal with URL and version. The documents pane displays the same governed item. Copilot in the pane answers, show me where this version was referenced, and returns timestamps with links to the portal transaction. Static returns, 2 frames linger. On the left, silence after a mistake. On the right, a trail that can testify. The fracture seals. The narrator returns. Intelligence did not fix the first path. It had nothing to hold. In the second, the witness spoke because memory existed. Content types anchored identity. Metadata narrowed context. Retention fixed the moment. Sensitivity traveled with the file. DLP guarded the boundary. Copilot did not guess. It remembered. Only truth crosses over. Architecture, sales opportunity loop. People think sales fails at the close. It fails at the first missing coordinate. The loop begins when an opportunity asks for a document and the system answers with a folder. In that timeline, names pretend to be identity. Attachments pretend to be evidence. The contract becomes a traveler without a passport. It crosses borders. It returns altered. No one can prove which version governed the price you promised. That is how deals rot in silence, break the loop at origin. Opportunity creation is not just a stage, it is an event that demands a bound location. When an opportunity reaches a threshold, proposal, contract draft, Dynamics opens the portal by rule, not by memory. A document location is created in the sales site, never a sub-site, never a user drive. The path is stamped with a coordinate you can testify to. Sales, opportunities, YWM, DD sales, contract, counterparty, opportunity, ID. The URL is written into the record, surfaced on the form and pinned in the timeline. Links beat copies because links carry law. Inside that location, libraries are rooms with purpose. Working holds drafts. Published holds decisions. Records holds artifacts whose time is set. The default view in Dynamics shows a filtered lens across those rooms. Content type in contract, statement of work, sorted by lifecycle state descending with columns that act like coordinates. Lifecycle state, sensitivity, retention category, business unit, expiration. A seller sees governed identity, not piles. Identity anchors the shape. Two content types do the heavy lifting. Contract and statement of work. Each requires opportunity ID, counterparty, effective date, life cycle state, sensitivity, retention category, governing jurisdiction, external sharing allowed, required means required. A contract cannot be saved without opportunity ID, but you cannot move to approved without a legal approver recorded. Friction here is not delay, it is memory asserting itself. Coordinates carry meaning. Business unit routes, label sets, and retention schedules. Lifecycle state is the switch that moves an item from working to published. Sensitivity is the passport. Confidential. Legal contract encrypts and blocks external sharing by default. Retention category fixes the end. Contract, 7 years after expiration. Statement of work, 5 years after project completion. Expiration feeds renewals. Effective date binds history. These fields are not for search, they are for truth. The flow is simple because it is strict. Draft in working in review collects red lines with role-scoped visibility. Legal approves. Lifecycle state flips to approved. A flow promotes the file to published, stamps the sensitivity label, writes an approval note into the version, and starts retention. The published version becomes the time marker. Further edits in published are locked down to minor fixes. Substantive change spawns a new artifact, a change order in the project loop, never a stealth overwrite. DLP stands guard at the boundary. Outlook sees the label and refuses attachments for items marked confidential, legal contract. A banner says, "This item is sensitive. Send a link." The seller clicks. Share link. External sharing is disabled by policy for this label. Exceptions require a justification captured in audit and a legal approver. The exception inherits identity. Even deviation becomes evidence. Permissions are inherited from roles, not negotiated in chat. Sales editors draft. Legal approvers approve. Sales readers read. Guests are off by default for these content types. If a customer portal is in use, it is the only sanctioned path for external view, with Azure AD B2B enforcing identity and Purview watching the gate. No side doors, no private channels that fork the record. The opportunity process binds to proof. Stage gates read the bound location. Advanced to contracted is blocked unless a contract in published shows lifecycle state X approved, with a legal approver recorded and sensitivity applied. Sales velocity increases because doubt decreases. The form asks less. The system proves more. Copilot becomes useful because memory exists. In the pane, the seller prompts, summarize differences between contract V1 and V2 and meaning. Copilot replies with clause-level changes, cites version IDs, quotes the approval comment, and ties the price to the opportunity ID. Confidence is shown. Sources are links you can click. Another prompt. Draft a renewal outline for Acme using the last approved contract and upcoming expiration. Copilot pulls the expiration, the jurisdiction, the clauses, and produces a draft that respects labels. It cannot send, it cannot unlabel, it can only remember and suggest. Renewals stop being superstition. A view called Approved Contracts expiring in 90 days by business unit surfaces what matters. Notifications link to the governed item. The same identity flows. Renewals become amendments that adjust expiration and role retention. The marker moves lawfully. No renewal final two in a desert of folders. A chain, not a rumor. Audits stop being tours. A reviewer clicks the opportunity, opens the documents pane, sees published, selects Contract V2, reads the approval note, notes sensitivity and retention, and follows the link to the customer portal transaction. The chain of evidence holds. The audit ends quickly because the proof arrives with the question. This loop is not mystical. It is a circuit that refuses to blur roles. Dynamics opens the timeline. SharePoint holds the evidence by identity. Purview enforces rights and time. Copilot witnesses and cites. No actor pretends to be another. That is why the circuit holds. Nothing is random. Everything is connected. In sales, the connection is this. The approved contract you can always find, always prove, and never leak. Cloud, not chaos. Sales failure. Timeline versus corrected. People think sales breaks its signature. It breaks at the first missing anchor. Timeline 1 begins with speed. An opportunity hits proposal. Someone drags a Word file from desktop to a team chat. A folder named Contracts receives it. No content type, no coordinates. The seller copies text to meet a deadline. Finance emails a clause. Legal replies in another thread. The contract becomes a traveler. Attachments multiply like mirrors. Track changes shows red stacked on red. A meeting moves the price. No one marks the moment. A manager asks, which version is live? The chat shrugs. Outlook holds 3 finals, each with different indemnity. A PDF appears. It is unsigned, but sent anyway, just to keep momentum. The customer replies a week later with edits against an old template. The gap widens. No one knows which file governed the last call. Doubt enters the room. The opportunity stalls not because of price, but because the team cannot prove itself to itself. A quarter later, audit arrives. Show the approved contract for Acme with the version used at signature. They search. They find file names, not identity. They produce a PDF with the right logo and the wrong clause. The auditor asks for provenance. There is none. The opportunity did not fail at negotiation. It failed at memory. Timeline 2 begins with a rule. Proposal stage opens the portal. Dynamics writes a document location in sales. The path is stamped with a coordinate. Sales, opportunities, YYYYMM, DD, sales, or contract, Acme, OPP 348. The URL is pinned on the form. No attachments. Links beat copies. Drafts live in working. The contract content type is declared with required fields. Opportunity ID binds to OPP 348. Counterparty says Acme. Governing jurisdiction selects NA. Lifecycle state starts at draft. Sensitivity is set to confidential legal contract. Retention category is contract. 7 years after expiration. These are not decorations, they are coordinates. Review happens in daylight. Legal opens V1 from the working library. Red lines are confined to reviewers. Approver comments record rationale. When acceptance lands, lifecycle state flips to approved. A flow promotes to published, stamps the watermark, and starts the clock. The version becomes a marker that can testify. Drafts continue elsewhere. They cannot change the bell that rang. External sharing is blocked by label. Outlook refuses attachments. The seller clicks Share Link. If the customer portal is configured, the link passes through a corridor with B2B identity. If a rare exception is needed, a justification is recorded and a legal approver is captured. Even deviation inherits law. Stage gates bind to proof. Advanced to contracted reads the published library. It demands a contract with lifecycle state equals approved, an approver in the legal role, and the sensitivity present. No ritual emails, no checklists that rot. The form asks less because the system can prove more. Renewals stop relying on folk memory. A view called approved contracts expiring in 90 days by business unit surfaces candidates. Copilot summarizes clauses and dates, cites version IDs, and drafts a renewal outline that respects jurisdiction. The seller edits the outline, never the record. The record remains the anchor. Audit becomes a click, not a pilgrimage. The reviewer opens the opportunity, lands in the documents pane, selects contract V2 in published, reads the approval note, sees retention and sensitivity, and follows the link to the portal transaction. The chain is unbroken. The request ends quickly because evidence is present where work happened. The failure timeline is not dramatic. It is ordinary drift. The corrected timeline is not theatrical. It is ordinary law. Dynamics stores the event. SharePoint stores the evidence. Purview enforces time and rights. Copilot stitches the narrative. The seller feels speed because doubt is gone. The manager feels control because gates read markers, not promises. The customer feels trust because the version is consistent wherever they look. The loop breaks at origin, not at signature, not in audit, at the first missing anchor that now exists. Demo fracture 4. Static blooms. 2 panes snap into focus. Left, Outlook compose window. Subject, Acme contract. The user drags contract final 2. Docks into the body. A faint banner whispers, no classification applied. They type, please review and sign. Send. A minute later, Teams lights up. Wrong version. Clause 12 is old. The user opens downloads. Contract final 2.docx. Properties show created yesterday. Modified 5 minutes ago. No label, no content type, no coordinates. They scroll through email. There is no link to follow. Only attachments to doubt. Right. Outlook compose window. Subject Acme contract V2. Link. The user clicks attach. A shielded item appears. 2025-04-03 sales contract Acme OPP348 V2. DocX. A banner rises, calm, unblinking. This item is sensitive. Send a link. The user clicks share link. A tooltip notes. External sharing is blocked for confidential. Legal contract. Use portal. A button reads, send via portal. Click. The message body fills with a governed link. The user hits send. No file leaves. Law travels. Cut to dynamics. The opportunities timeline shows an entry. Contract V2 approved. Link sent via customer portal. The URL exists. The version ID exists. The approver exists. The event is bound to evidence. Cut to Word. The governed document opens from published. Watermark, confidential, legal contract. The user clicks Copilot. Prompt. Summarize the differences between V1 and V2 with meaning. Copilot replies. Indemnity tightened. Pricing aligned to OPP348. Approved by legal on June 12th. It cites V1 and V2 by immutable IDs. Confidence high. Sources 2 items with links. Cut to SharePoint. The library view shows filters. Content type equals contract. Lifecycle state equals approved. 2 rows remain. Columns display sensitivity, retention, expiration. A Purview banner at the top reads, auto label applied by contract keywords, DLP, external sharing blocked. The info panel shows approver, legal, approval, note, clause updated to standard. Version history is a ladder that holds. Static fades. The left screen lingers with silence and apologies. The right screen holds a trail anyone can follow. The narrator returns. The difference is not talent. It is law. Attachments birth parallel timelines. Links preserve a single narrative. DLP is not an obstacle. It is the fence that keeps the path clear. Copilot did not rescue a mess. It spoke because the archive existed. Only truth crosses over. Architecture. Project collaboration loop. People think projects fail at delivery. They fail when collaboration pretends to be custody. The loop starts with enthusiasm and ends with amnesia. A team spawns channels like branches in winter. Files bloom on desktops, then drop, untracked. Owners leave. Knowledge leaves with them. What remains is noise that can't testify. Break the loop at entry. A project is an event with evidence, not a chat with files. When a project is initiated in Dynamics or your project register, the portal opens by rule. A document location is created in the project site, not a subsite, not a private drive, a single capability site with rooms you can trust, working, published, records. The path is stamped with coordinates you can repeat under oath. Projects, project ID, YEMMDD projects, doc type, project ID. The URL is written into the project's form and timeline. Links beat copies because links carry context and law. Identity anchors the surface. Content types define the artifacts that govern scope and change. Statement of work, change order, decision log, risk register, status report, technical specification. Each content type carries required fields that fix reality. Project ID, baseline date, lifecycle state, sensitivity, retention category, governing jurisdiction. SOW adds price and scope summary. Change order adds prior SOW reference, delta cost, delta schedule, approval stamp. Decision log adds decision ID, options considered, final rationale, approver, effective date. These are not preferences, they are coordinates. Coordinates drive view and flow. In Dynamics, the document's pane for the project does not show a heap. It shows a curated lens of SOW and change order at the top, then decision logs, then status reports. Columns show lifecycle state, sensitivity, retention, baseline date, delta values. Drafts live in working, reviews are role scoped. Approval flips, lifecycle state to approved, promotes to published, applies the label, and starts retention. Records are declared by disposition or movement to the records room when the lifecycle ends. No manual archive. Time moves forward because labels define ends. Collaboration gets a corridor. Teams can host conversations, meetings, and ephemeral working drafts in channel folders. But the document of record is born, reviewed, and fixed in the governed libraries, not in a private corner. Private channels cannot hold record paths. If someone tries to plant a final in a private channel, the lifecycle blocks promotion without required metadata and approval. The conversation can move fast. The record cannot be misplaced. Gates bind process to proof. A project cannot baseline without a statement of work in published at lifecycle state equals approved. Baseline date is captured, and retention for project artifacts begins when completion triggers in Dynamics. A change cannot be reported without a change order in published with approval stamp recorded. A decision cannot shape scope until a decision log item with decision effective exists. These gates end the theater of status slides that contradict reality. The system reads the map. DLP stands at the edges. Technical specifications might be internal. SOW and change orders are often confidential. Project commercials. Customer evidence incorporated into projects might be restricted evidence. Labels travel across Word, Excel, and Visio. Outlook refuses sensitive attachments and pushes links. External sharing for specific content types is off by policy. Exceptions require justification and approval. The exception inherits an audit trail. Even deviation becomes part of memory. Permissions reflect roles, not favors. Project editors draft and propose. Approvers in PMO and legal can approve. Readers can read. Guests are allowed only where content types permit and labels allow. Azure AD B2B enforces identity. Purview enforces law. Private shares in chat cannot bypass the corridor. If someone attempts to paste a local copy, DLP asks for justification or denies. Either outcome prevents a split timeline. Views become instruments. Approved SOWs by business unit and EOQ. Open change orders with delta cost, $50,000. Decisions since baseline with high risk. Status reports in last 30 days. These are not lists. They are lenses driven by the fields you required. Managers stop asking for decks. They read the source. Copilot witnesses in the pane. Summarize scope drift since baseline. It reads decision log and change orders after baseline date, cites version IDs, approval notes, and delta metrics, and returns meaning, not gossip. Compare technical specification V3 and V5. What changed and why? It cites versions, quotes rationale from approval comments, displays confidence, and links to items. Classify this new upload and propose retention. It reads phrases, finds project ID, checks jurisdiction, maps to content type, and shows the Purview rule match. It cannot publish, it cannot delete, it advises with sources. Completion is an event, not a meeting. When Dynamics sets the project to closed, a signal starts the retention clocks. Project artifact, 5 years after completion. Drafts in working that never mattered decay on schedule. Approved artifacts remain accessible while they matter. At end, the system declares records or disposes with evidence. The future stops inheriting the debris of rehearsals. Audit becomes brief. A reviewer opens the project, enters the documents pane, selects SO in published, sees lifecycle state, sensitivity, retention, and version history with approval notes. They open change orders and decision logs. The chain holds. There is no scramble. The operational truth is the audit truth. The project loop breaks because the corridor exists. Dynamics stores events. SharePoint houses evidence by identity. Purview enforces time and rights. Copilot remembers and stitches. Collaboration continues, loud and fast. The record remains quiet and exact. Cloud, not chaos. Knowledge loss versus controlled libraries. Knowledge loss versus controlled libraries. People think knowledge dies when people leave. It doesn't. It dies when the system lets memory scatter. A resignation only reveals what was already lost. The uncontrolled path looks like momentum. A project spins up. Someone creates a private channel because we'll clean it later. Files arrive in chat, then in email, then in desktop folders called temp, old, and use this. A status deck summarizes decisions, but the deck becomes the record, not the decision. Meeting notes live in OneNote with no link to an artifact. Screenshots pile up with names that mean nothing. Owners change. Roles shift. A year later, the new lead asks, "Why did we accept that variance?" Silence answers, "The people are gone. The evidence was never born." Controlled libraries refuse to confuse collaboration with custody. Projects still talk in teams, but evidence lives where identity, coordinates, and law exist. Working, published records, not as ceremony, as survival. In working, drafts breathe. Designers post early, engineers redline, PMs collect comments. But every draft declares a content type on upload. Technical specification, decision log, change order, required fields anchor the breadth, project ID, lifecycle state, sensitivity, retention category. Without those, the draft cannot stay. Friction here is the first act of memory. The map forms as you move. In published, decisions become fixed points. Lifecycle state flips to approved. A flow promotes, stamps the label, writes the approval note into the version, and starts retention. The version becomes the time marker. The room forbids casual change. Minor corrections track as controlled subversions. Substantive change creates a sibling change order, never a ghost edit. The narrative stays linear. In records, endings are enforced. When the project closes in Dynamics, retention clocks begin. Project artifact. 5 years after completion, items become records or wait for scheduled disposition. Drafts that never mattered decay. Approved artifacts persist as testimony until their promised end. The future stops inheriting the rubble of rehearsals. Knowledge loss is not a mystery. It is the sum of orphaned artifacts. Controlled libraries prevent orphans. A decision log in working requires decision ID and effective date. A risk cannot be reported in a deck if the risk register content type does not carry it first. A meeting summary can be a page, but the action must reference an artifact by URL and version. Links beat copies because links bind context and law. Chain of custody applies beyond cases. A handoff in projects is a form of custody. When ownership changes, the system records role change on the project entity and writes a note in the timeline that references the governed location. The libraries do not care who holds the chair. The map remains. The coordinates do not reset with the person. Search is not rescue. Views are instruments. Decisions since baseline with high risk. Change orders with delta schedule 10 days. Technical specifications at lifecycle state equals approved last 30 days. Each lens draws from fields you forced into existence. The new lead does not trawl chats. They open the lens and see what matters. The past is legible because you carved coordinates when it was still present. DLP is not a nuisance. It is the wall between conversation and custody. Try to paste a final from downloads into chat. The system checks label absence, content type absence, and policy. It warns, then blocks or forces justification with approver capture. If approved, the exception inherits an audit trail. Even deviation becomes memory. Copilot makes this visible. Prompt: summarize decisions since baseline. Cite sources. It reads decision log items with lifecycle state equals effective after baseline date. It returns a thread with links, dates, approvers, and rationale. Prompt: where is the spec that governed the outage fix last quarter? It finds technical specification v3 and published, tied to project ID with the approval note that mentions the fix. It cites the version. It does not infer. It recalls. People still leave. When they do, the system does not grieve. It points. The new lead asks, why did we accept that variance? The decision log item answers with its effective date, its rationale, its approver. The version answers with the clause that changed. The retention panel answers with when it will end. The map persists. The work continues. Cloud, not chaos. On Demo Fracture 5, static deepens. A cursor blinks. 2 timelines split. On the left, a handover meeting ends. Everything's in the team, someone says. The new lead searches the team's channel. Files shows hundreds of documents. Filters show nothing. A folder named Old holds 3 status decks. The decks summarize decisions but link to nothing. One slide reads, accept vendor delay, update milestone. No decision log exists. The new lead opens OneNote. A page describes a debate about risk but cites no artifact. They ask chat, where is the approved change order? Silence, then emojis. The owner left last month. The file lived on a desktop. Knowledge didn't die today. It died when custody never formed. On the right, the project site opens at projects PRJ 221 scene. The document's pane shows views. The new lead clicks. Decisions since baseline. A list appears. Decision ID 17. Accept vendor delay. Rebaseline plus 114 days. Effective date, approver, link. They click. The decision log item opens. Content type equal decision log. Lifecycle state equal effective. Project ID equal PRJ 221 scene. The approval comment explains the risk trade. A link points to change order CO004. Click. Change order V1 in published appears. Fields show prior SOW reference delta schedule equal 14 approval stamp sensitivity is confidential. Project commercials retention x project artifact 5 years after completion. Word opens the governed change order. The watermark is present. The info panel shows version history with the approver note. The lead clicks Copilot. Prompt: Explain why CO004 was approved and how it altered schedule. Cite sources. Copilot replies, CO004 accepted vendor delay due to part shortage. Delta schedule plus 14 days. Approved by PMO on March 4th. Rebaseline recorded same day. It cites the decision log and CO004 by immutable version IDs with links. Confidence high. They open the view. Technical specifications at lifecycle state ILS approved last 30 days. The spec that governed the outage fix appears. Clicking reveals the approval note that ties it to the incident. Chain intact. No scavenger hunt. No folklore. Cut to teams. The lead tries to drag CO004 into chat. A banner rises. This item is sensitive. Send a link. They click share link. DLP limits access to the project team. External sharing is blocked. The message posts with a governed URL. The corridor holds. Static fades. On the left, questions accumulate. On the right, answers cite themselves. The narrator returns, people leave, projects end, the past becomes heavy or helpful. Controlled libraries do not make you careful. They make you able to remember. The witness spoke because the archive existed. Only truth crosses over. Architecture, case evidence loop. People think service fails in response time. It fails in proof. A case opens, screenshots scatter. Emails hold attachments like loose teeth. Agents paste files into notes. The customer escalates. Legal asks for chain of custody. The system offers a story without evidence. That is how trust rots. Break the loop at the first contact. A case is not a mailbox. It is an event with evidence. When a case is created in Dynamics, the portal opens by rule. A document location is created in the service site, not a subsite, not a mailbox folder. A governed corridor with rooms, working, published, records. The path is stamped with coordinates you can repeat. Service, cases, case number, YYMMDD service, doc type, all case number. Dynamics writes the URL into the case form and timeline. Links beat attachments because links bind context and law. Identity anchors custody. Evidence is not files. It is artifacts with content types. Customer evidence, investigation note, resolution summary, incident timeline, regulatory notice, call transcript. Each requires fields that fix reality. Case number, source, email, portal, phone. Collected by, collected date, chain of custody step, life cycle state, sensitivity, retention category, PII, present, yes, no, jurisdiction. For customer evidence, add original file name, original sender, hash. For investigation note, add investigator, reference artifact, finding. For resolution summary, add root cause, remediation, approval. If these fields feel heavy, it is because custody is heavy. The map forms as you collect. Coordinates drive the pain. In Dynamics, the Documents tab shows a filtered lens, not a pile. Customer evidence at top. Investigation notes next. Resolution summary last. Columns show life cycle state, sensitivity, retention, chain of custody step, PII flag. Agency evidence, not debris. Chain of custody becomes a path, not folklore. When an email arrives with attachments, the agent clicks Save to Case. The system extracts files into the working library under Customer Evidence, captures original file name, sender, received timestamp, calculates a hash, and records chain of custody step equals collected. The email body is stored as a call transcript or message artifact with a link to the attachments. No drag drop to desktop, no invisible copies. Custody begins at the border. Review is scoped, investigation notes, collect analysis linked to specific evidence by URL. Approval flips life cycle state to approved for the resolution summary. A flow promotes the resolution summary to published, stamps the sensitivity, and starts retention. Customer evidence receives a label, restricted, evidence. No print, no download, encryption on. DLP blocks external sharing by default. Exceptions require a legal approver and justification recorded on the item. Even deviation becomes memory. PII is detected, not assumed. Purview auto-labeling inspects uploads. If patterns like credit cards, ID numbers, or IBANs are found, or if the content type is customer evidence, a sensitivity label is proposed or applied per policy. The UI shows the label banner. Outlook respects it. Copilot respects it. The corridor narrows when risk rises. Gates bind closure to proof. A case cannot move to resolved unless the resolution summary exists in published at lifecycle state equals approved. If customer evidence exists with chain of custody step not equal to sealed, closure blocks. If any required investigation note lacks a finding, closure blocks. These are not bureaucratic tricks. They are the end of theater. Retention becomes the long shadow you can describe. Case evidence, 10 years event-based. The timer does not start at upload. It starts when the case is resolved and a disposition event is recorded. Regulatory retention, 10 years. Legal hold pauses everything with a visible seal. When a hold lifts, clocks resume. Disposition becomes a ritual with approver and rationale captured. Auditors do not want intent, they want endings. Purview produces them without theater. Service does not stop at the boundary. Customers still email. Agents still paste. DLP intervenes. Try to paste a restricted evidence file into chat. A banner says, "This item is restricted. Evidence." Send a link inside the case. The agent clicks Copy Governed Link. The message posts with limited access, scoped to the service team. No artifact leaves. Copilot witnesses without trespass. In the case pane, summarize evidence collected and steps taken. Cite sources. It returns a narrative with links to customer evidence, investigation notes, and the resolution summary, version IDs displayed, confidence shown. Is any PII present? It lists items with PII flag equals yes and labels applied pulled from Purview detection. Generate a regulator letter from the resolution summary. It drafts content within the governed corridor, respecting labels. It cannot email, it cites, it remembers. Escalations stop being theater. A manager opens the case, sees evidence counts, chain of custody state, labels, and retention. They click the resolution summary and published. The approval note explains rationale. They open the incident timeline. The sequence is clear. The chain holds. Audit becomes brief. Show all evidence for case 10437, chain of custody, and retention. The reviewer enters the URL on the case, opens the view, evidence with custody. Every item shows source collected by hash custody steps, labels, retention. They click the disposition record. The end is documented. The case loop breaks because custody exists. Dynamics holds the event. SharePoint holds the evidence by identity. Purview enforces law and time. Copilot stitches the story without crossing the boundary. Service speeds up because trust returns. Only truth crosses over. Cloud, not chaos. Chain of custody rebuilt. People think custody is a signature on a form. It isn't. It is a line through time. If any segment goes dark, the whole chain is suspect. Doubt enters. Truth erodes. Cases don't collapse because someone lied. They collapse because no one can prove who held what, when, and why. Rebuild the line from the first touch. A case opens. The corridor forms. Evidence arrives by email, portal, or phone. The agent does not drag to desktop. They click Save to Case. The system ingests to the working room under customer evidence. It captures original file name, original sender, received timestamp. It calculates a cryptographic hash. It records chain of custody step equals collected. Collected by equals agent. Collected date equals now. A pointer to the source message is linked. The artifact is preserved without movement myths. Identity binds every step. Content type equals customer evidence demands. Case number, source, collected by, chain of custody step, PII flag, sensitivity. The required fields are not ceremony. They are coordinates that hold the path together. If any field is missing, custody halts. Friction here is discipline. It makes forgetting harder than compliance. The next step is review. Investigation notes. Reference evidence by governed URL, never by file name. The note itself is an artifact. Content type equals investigation note with investigator, reference artifact, finding, lifecycle state. Reviewers see both the note and the evidence it cites. The link is live. The context holds. Approval creates a fixed point. Resolution summary moves from draft to in review to approved. At that moment, a flow promotes it to published, stamps the sensitivity label, writes the approval note into version history, and starts retention. The version becomes the bell that rings. The narrative after that is interpretation, not law. Sealing ends custody. When all required evidence is collected and referenced, the agent performs the seal action. The system updates chain of custody step, is sealed, writes who sealed, where and when, and prevents further edits to the sealed item. Additional evidence can still be collected, but sealed items are frozen. The chain now contains segments that cannot be bent. Purview adds the teeth. Customer evidence receives restricted evidence, no print, no download, encryption on, external sharing blocked by default. Attempts to move evidence out of the corridor are intercepted. Outlook offers a governed link. Teams refuses a paste that would fork the record. If a legal exception is required, a justification is entered, a legal approver is captured, and the exception inherits the label and the audit trail. Even deviation is memory, not folklore. PII is detected and disclosed. Purview auto-labeling scans newly saved artifacts. Credit cards, national IDs, IBNs, and sensitive phrases trigger labels and flags. The UI shows the label. The case panel shows PII present, yes, and lists the patterns. Agents know which items carry heavier law. Copilot sees the label and narrows its answers. The witness respects the corridor. Gates bind closure to custody. A case cannot move to resolved unless customer evidence items are sealed. The resolution summary is approved and published, and every investigation note that supports the resolution carries a finding. If any step is missing, the system refuses closure. The refusal is not bureaucratic, it is integrity. Disposition anchors endings. Retention is event-based, 10 years from resolution. When the case is marked resolved, a disposition event is recorded. Legal hold pauses clocks with a visible seal. When the hold lifts, time resumes. At end, the system disposes with a record of who authorized, when, and why. The chain does not end in silence, it ends with testimony of its ending. Visibility is constant. A view called evidence with custody shows each item's source collected by hash, current custody step, PII flag, sensitivity, and sealed status. Another view, unsealed evidence, surfaces what blocks closure. Managers do not chase screenshots. They open a lens and see where the line breaks. Repair becomes a click, not a hunt. Copilot amplifies the documented path. Summarize the custody of evidence for case 10437. It returns a sequence. Collected, reviewed, sealed, with timestamps, actors, and links, citing immutable version IDs. List PII-bearing items with labels. It lists them with label names and Purview policy references. It cannot invent. It cannot cross the corridor. It recites what the record can prove. Chain of custody is not theater. It is the refusal to let memory scatter. Dynamics holds the event. SharePoint holds the evidence by identity. Purview enforces law and time. Copilot witnesses with citations. The line through time remains unbroken. Only truth crosses over. Demo Fracture 6. Static blooms. The frame splits. Left. Outlook preview. Subject evidence for case 10437. The body reads, see attached. 3 files hang from the message. Agent drags them to desktop. Opens one. Renames it final PNG. Drops it into the case notes. No content type, no hash, no source. Later, a manager asks, "Where did this come from?" The agent points to their downloads. The sender is gone. The mailbox is purged. The chain is folklore. Glitch. The scene bends. Right. Dynamics, case 10437. Documents tab. Button. Save to case. The agent clicks. A panel lists the email's attachments. They select all. The system ingests to customer evidence in working. The info panel fills. Original file name. Original sender. Received timestamp. Hash calculated. Chain of custody step it's collected. PII flag lights for one item. Label applied. Restricted. Evidence. Outlook shows a banner on the original message. Attachments saved to case 10437. Governed links available. A link appears in the case timeline. Evidence collected from message with URL. The agent opens an image in SharePoint. Watermark absent by design. The label banner shows restricted. Evidence. The info panel displays hash, source, and chain state. They click seal. A dialog requires a note. Verified against portal upload. Seal confirmed. Chain of custody step equals sealed. Edit disabled. They create an investigation note. Content type, investigation note. Fields require investigator, reference artifact, finding. They paste the governed URL, not a file. Lifecycle state, in review. Approver comments. Finding confirmed. Lifecycle state flips to approved. A resolution summary draft is completed. Lifecycle state flips to approved. A flow promotes to published. Stamps sensitivity. Starts retention. Version history records the approval note. The case status is set to resolved. A gate intervenes. Unsealed evidence items. 1. The agent opens the view unsealed evidence. Seals the remaining item with a note. Tries again. The gate lifts. A disposition event is created. Case closed. Retention 10 years from resolution. Cut to Outlook. The agent replies to the customer. They click attach. The governed resolution summary appears with a shield. A banner rises. This item is sensitive. Send a link. They send the link. External sharing is blocked by label. The customer reads via the portal with identity. No artifact leaves. Cut to Copilot in the case pane. Prompt. Summarize evidence custody for 10437. Cite sources. It answers with collected, sealed, approved, with dates, actors, and links. Confidence, high. Policies referenced, restricted, evidence, case evidence, 10 years. Static fades on the left, doubt. On the right, a line through time that holds. The fracture seals Purview as law. People think governance is bureaucracy. It isn't. It is gravity. It is the force that keeps records from drifting into myth. Purview does not negotiate. It declares. Labels, retention, DLP, auto-classification. These are not options. They are statutes. When they exist, time has shape. When they don't, time folds back on itself and the loop returns. Start with sensitivity labels. They are protective symbols, not stickers, not vibes. Symbols that carry rights, encryption, and rules wherever the item goes. Internal means conversation stays inside the city walls. Confidential. Finance means spreadsheets carry locks and banners, and Outlook refuses to smuggle them through attachments. Confidential. Legal contract means promotions to published start encryption, and external sharing is off by default. Restricted. Evidence is the hard seal. No download, no print, device checks at the gate, and every attempt to move the artifact triggers a record of intent. Labels are memory with teeth. Only truth crosses over. Retention is the calendar that never forgets. A contract is not immortal. It is 7 years after expiration, no earlier, no later. A project artifact is 5 years after completion. Case evidence is 10 years, event-based. Policy documents can be forever if the law demands it. These aren't suggestions for humans to recall. They are clocks carried by the item itself, started by events, paused by holds, ending in documented disposition. The moment of approval becomes a fixed point. The end becomes a statement, not a shrug. DLP is the boundary between timelines. The unmanaged device is another world. The anonymous link is a breach between realities. DLP stands there and says no. Block external sharing for contracts, financials, evidence. Allow overrides only with justification and a named approver, so deviation becomes evidence. Block downloads to unmanaged devices for restricted labels. Strip permissions from copy-paste on endpoint when the label demands it. Outlook learns the law and refuses attachments for governed classes. Teams learns the law and asks for links. The boundary is not a best practice. It is the wall that keeps the main road clear. Auto-classification is the unseen hand. Humans miss, forget, and rush. Purview does not. It reads the signals, IBAN, credit cards, national IDs. It notices phrases like statement of work, indemnity, root cause, change order. It sees project IDs, opportunity IDs, case numbers. It proposes or it applies based on policy. It adds labels when silence would have prevailed. It raises the floor so that intelligence can speak on top of truth. Law is not universal. It is scoped with precision. Policies target locations and content, not vague hopes. Sales libraries receive the contract statutes. Project libraries receive the commercial and technical strictures. Service libraries receive the evidence seals. Admin units narrow administration to those who can carry the burden. Conditions refine the force. Apply restricted. Evidence when content type is customer evidence, or when patterns indicate PII and the case tag is present. This is not heuristic theater. It is deterministic coverage that turns intent into posture. Visibility is part of law. Without sight, enforcement becomes superstition. Activity Explorer shows label application, removals, downgrades, edits after approval, link sharing attempts, overrides, and reasons. Data security posture surfaces where Copilot touched sensitive data and which labels were referenced. Communication compliance shows jailbreak attempts in prompts and blocks them with receipts. Insider risk assembles trend lines across acts, bulk downloads, label removal, external sharing, then raises a hand when the pattern reveals a plan. The statute does not just deny, it testifies. Law must align with the route humans take, or they build tunnels. Purview's controls live in the corridor. When Outlook says send a link, the banner is not an error. It is the map. When Word shows the watermark, the user understands the context. When SharePoint filters by content type and lifecycle, a person sees the room they're in. When Dynamics gates a stage based on a governed document, the process becomes short and sure. The law shortens good paths and lengthens the bad. Copilot is bound by these statutes. It cannot unlabel, it cannot delete. It cites sources with immutable version IDs. It displays confidence. It explains why a label was suggested by referencing the auto-classification rule. When asked why is this blocked, it answers DLP policy, contracts no external, denies attachments for confidential, legal contract. The witness respects the bench. Do not confuse strictness with slowness. Law reduces friction by ending doubt. Attachments no longer breed parallel histories. Approvals no longer dissolve into hearsay. Endings arrive on schedule with signatures you can read. The loop breaks because the story is constrained. There is one event, there is one place, there is one label, there is one end. People think chaos is creative. It is waste. Purview is not a tool set. It is the charter of your city. Without it, people wander. With it, they move. Chaos cannot survive where every record carries truth with it. Label strategy with clarity. People think labels are flavors. They are jurisdictions. a map of what can happen where and by whom. If the map is vague, people improvise tunnels. If the map is clear, paths emerge and speed returns. Clarity begins with a small legible ladder, 4 rungs: public, internal, confidential, restricted, nothing more to start. Public is the open square, no secrets, no special rights. Internal is within the walls, shareable across the city, never beyond. Confidential is gated by purpose, finance, legal, project commercials, each a sub-law with distinct rights. Restricted is the hard seal, evidence board, M&A, no print, no download, encryption always, device checks at the gate. The names speak in plain language so users do not guess what the law requires. Do not create a label per team, create a label per risk. 2 or 3 confidential variants cover most of the city. Confidential, finance for spreadsheets with monetary consequence. Confidential, legal contract for governed contracts and SOWs. Confidential, project commercials for change orders and commercial negotiations. Each inherits the same backbone, encryption on, external sharing off by default, but differs in DLP policy and allowed exceptions. Purpose, not pride, defines the set. Restricted is not ornamental, it is the stop. Restricted. Evidence seals, customer evidence, investigation notes and regulator communications. No print, no download, watermark where appropriate. Endpoint DLP blocks copy out. Unmanaged devices see only web or nothing. Exceptions require justification and a named approver. The exception inherits label, audit, and expiry. Even deviation becomes evidence. The symbol means something you can explain in court. Labels must bind to identity, not vibes. A label without a content type is a sticker on fog. Contract in published carries confidential legal contract by rule. Change order in published carries confidential. Project commercials. Customer evidence carries restricted. Evidence when PII is present or when the content type itself demands custody. Decision logs are often internal. Technical specifications may be internal or confidential depending on customer presence. The alignment is declared in policy. Users see consistency. Systems see determinism. Clarity is visible. Watermarks remind the eye. Banners speak at the edge where mistakes occur. In Outlook, this item is sensitive. Send a link. In Teams, this file cannot be shared externally. In SharePoint, the info panel shows label, retention, and policy references. In Dynamics, the document pane displays sensitivity as a column. The law is not hidden. It is taught by the interface at the precise moment a human might wonder. Auto-labeling is not an experiment. It is the floor. Use built-in patterns to identify PII, credit cards, national IDs, IBAN. Use keyword dictionaries for contracts, indemnity, governing law, statement of work. Use trainable classifiers if you have enough truth to teach. For sales libraries, rules propose confidential. Legal contract, when contract content type and language detected. For service, rules apply, restricted. Evidence when PII found and case number present. For projects, rules propose confidential. Project commercials, when change order schema matches. Start in simulation, measure false positives. Then enforce. Quietly, the floor rises. Downgrades are not silent. A user can lower a label only with justification. Purview records the reason, the actor, the time, and the item. Insider risk reads the trend. Who downgrades often around what events? And raises a hand when the pattern suggests intent. The statute does not trust charm. It trusts patterns. Labels must travel with the artifact. PDFs inherit, exports inherit where possible. When conversion strips a label, endpoint DLP intervenes and refuses or relabels per rule. Emailed exports become governed links. Attachments are refused where the law demands it. The city's border is not an honor system. It is a gate that checks papers. Keep the set small until reality demands growth. Add when a new jurisdiction appears, health data, government contracts, cross-border rules. Each edition must carry a story. Who is protected? What rights are enforced? Where overrides live and why it exists? If you cannot write the story, you do not need the label. Clarity is mercy. People stop guessing. Systems stop negotiating. Copilot can explain, this file is confidential, legal contract due to contract keywords and content type rule, and cite the policy by name. The witness speaks the law because the law is simple, visible, and inevitable. Cloud, not chaos. Labels, not legends. Retention strategy bound to events. People think retention is a clock you set and forget. It isn't. It is a promise tied to an event. Without the event, the clock is superstition. With it, time has edges. Bind every rule to a moment you can prove. Contracts do not start their 7 years when someone uploads a draft to working. They start when the contract becomes law. The fixed point is approval in published plus expiration. The event is recorded on the item. Life cycle state E approved, effective date, expiration date. Retention equals 7 years after expiration. Purview reads the event, not a guess. Projects do not begin their 5 years because a folder existed. They start when the project closes in dynamics. Completion becomes a disposition event that strikes across the governed set. Project artifact, 5 years after completion. The timer attaches to the items that matter. SOW, change orders, decision logs, status reports in published. Drafts that never crossed into law decay on shorter terms or at closure per policy. Memory keeps what was real. Rehearsals end. Cases do not carry 10 years because a file looks important. The law begins at resolution. The system writes a disposition event on the case, resolved on this date. Purview maps, case evidence, 10 years from resolution. Customer evidence, investigation notes, resolution summary inherit. Legal hold pauses clocks with visible seals. When the hold lifts, time resumes. Endings are not shadows. They are recorded endings. Event-based retention requires identity. Content types are not decoration. They hold the fields the law reads. Contract carries effective and expiration. Change order carries approval and baseline shift. Decision log carries effective date. Resolution summary carries approved on. If those fields are absent, retention cannot bind. Friction here is mercy. It prevents orphaned time. Events must be visible. A panel on the item shows retention. Policy name, start basis, time remaining. A viewer can say, this ends on March 3rd, 7 years after expiration, because the item says so. Managers see views, contracts expiring this quarter, artifacts nearing disposition, cases approaching 10-year end. The future stops ambushing you. You walk to it. Do not let exported ghosts escape the calendar. When a governed document is rendered to PDF, the label travels. The retention travels. If the conversion strips metadata, endpoint DLP intervenes. It refuses the copy or restamps the result per policy. Emails inherit precedence from attachments when the attachment is governed. The message carries the stricter timer. The archive remains one story. Disposal is not deletion, it is testimony of an ending. When a retention period completes, the system proposes disposition with context. Policy, event, dates, approvers. Reviewers see grouped items with filters by content type and business area. Approval writes a note. The system deletes and records the act. The chain includes the last link. Exceptions are rare and formal. If a regulator demands longer, a case-level policy extends the horizon. If litigation intervenes, a legal hold pauses clocks. These changes are banners, not whispers. The item says, on hold, with reason and case reference. When the hold lifts, time resumes from where it slept. Law bends, it does not break. Copilot stays within the calendar. Ask, which contracts reach disposition in 90 days? provide renewal risk and cite sources. It returns a list with links, effective and expiration dates, label names, and retention rules. Ask, why is this still retained? It answers, policy contract, 7 years after expiration, expired on June 1st. Retention ends May 31st, 7 years hence. Legal hold active, case 22-147. It cites the item. It does not invent ends. Attach retention to the moments that matter. Approval, expiration, completion, resolution. Without events, time loops. With events, time moves. Dynamics holds the triggers. SharePoint holds the items that listen. Purview keeps the clocks. The universe stops hoarding drafts and starts keeping promises. Nothing is random. Everything is connected. DLP guardrails that hold. People think prevention is a cage. It isn't. It's a road with rails. Without them, every turn is a cliff. Data loss prevention is the line that keeps parallel timelines from touching. It does not argue. It intervenes. Begin at the edge where most splits start. Email. A governed document. Confidential. Legal contract. Confidential. Finance. Restricted. Evidence meets Outlook. The user drags to attach. A banner rises, calm and final. This item is sensitive. Send a link. Attachments are refused for these jurisdictions. A governed link replaces the impulse to smuggle. The message carries a path, not a payload. The narrative stays single. Teams learns the same law. Paste from downloads into chat and DLP inspects. No label, no content type, no coordinates. The post is blocked or forced into justification with approver capture. If approved, the exception inherits a trail and an expiry. Even deviation becomes memory. Private channels do not become escape tunnels. The corridor holds. Endpoints obey the seal. A restricted evidence file opens on a managed device. Copy, print, and save as are cut. Attempt to move it to an unmanaged desktop and endpoint DLP denies. The unmanaged device is another world. Anonymous links are breaches between realities. The boundary is explicit, web only, or no access. The symbol means what it says. SharePoint and OneDrive enforce per content type and label, not mood. External sharing is blocked for contracts, financials, and evidence libraries. Internal shares inherit least privilege. Guests are allowed only where content types permit and labels allow. A link cannot outrank law. A person cannot widen a link beyond its statute. If they try, DLP asks for a reason, a scope, an approver. The system writes it down. Clipboard control quiets the small leaks. A user copies from a governed workbook. The label travels with the selection. Paste into an unmanaged app and DLP erases the action. Paste into Word governed by the same label and the text lands with the banner intact. Small acts stop forming big holes. Conditional access completes the perimeter with identity. Sensitive labels demand managed context. If a session lacks device health or strong auth, the policy reduces the session to web and denies downloads or denies entirely. The city gate checks papers. The guardrail is not a pop-up. It is the shape of the route. Policies are precise. Contracts no external denies attachments and anonymous links for confidential legal contract. Finance web only unmanaged denies downloads for confidential. Finance on unmanaged devices. Evidence link only forces governed links and blocks reshares outside the service team for restricted evidence. These names are not theater. They are public law inside your city. Oversharing collapses first. DLP meets it with scoping and discovery. Libraries are pruned to teams that need them. Access reviews run. When Copilot interacts with sensitive content, DSPM for AI reports labels referenced and interactions by type. If patterns emerge, bulk downloads, frequent downgrades, anonymous shares, insider risk raises risk and hands conditional access, a condition. Elevated risk narrows the corridor until proof returns. DLP's refusals teach Outlook's banner tells the truth. Send a link. Teams message explains. External sharing is blocked by policy contracts. No external. In SharePoint's panel shows which rule denied the action. Copilot can answer why. With the policy name and scope, human intent is redirected, not shamed. DLP does not slow the honest path, it speeds it. Send a governed link from the opportunity. Review in the published room. Approve with a stamp that triggers retention. Share to guests where labels and content types permit. Every step is shorter because guessing is gone. The loop breaks because guardrails remove the exits to nowhere. Attachments no longer fork history. Anonymous links no longer dissolve borders. Unmanaged devices no longer siphon truth. Chaos cannot survive where every record carries truth with it. DLP is the quiet force that keeps truth on the road. Cloud, not chaos.